In 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTKA online at WTK.com. Sam Webb, Ira Weintraub on the other side. And it is time for the MGoBlog Roundtable with the crew from MGoBlog.com. Starting off first, man that started it all over there at MGoBlog. One, Mr. Brian Cook. Brian, good morning. How are you?
Morning. I'm good.
All right. And then Seth and Craig and Seth, you guys are here in the last segment. And you're picking back up just before we move on to talking to conference expansion. Did you have any? Were you finished with your thought there, Seth? Did you have a rebuttal there, Craig, that you wanted to get on the last point that we were talking about NIL?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's useful to distinguish between NIL and PFP. And what Michigan is not doing is pay for play. They are doing NIL. They're not doing pay for play. And whether they can endure in an environment where, one, they're not doing pay for play, and where at least in the short term it looks like maybe Jim Harbaugh doesn't want to be at Michigan, where certainly that's being said by other programs. I think it makes it very difficult for Michigan to recruit well. Now, I don't think it's impossible. I do think you can beeline it. I think you can find guys who can play who aren't 5 stars or highly regarded 4 stars, but I think it's very, very difficult. And whether they can do it or not remains to be seen. But, right now it's legitimate for fans to be concerned. And it may be, as Seth and Brian seem to have said, and they're probably right, that Michigan will just get burned badly by this and we'll have to start playing the game too. So I don't know.
What's going to happen, I think, is that Michigan's boosters are just as upset as a lot of the fans are, I think. Mm-hmm. And right now, a lot of them are just they're jumping in the game. They're playing the NIL game that Michigan wants them to, but some of them are going to go rogue because there's nothing stopping them anymore. I mean, used to like. Go ahead.
They can't go rogue when it's not like barred anymore, right? It's not going rogue. It's just like doing the thing that you can do.
Exactly.
It's like turning right and a no red turn signal when it's a green light. It's like, all right, well, that's fine, I guess. So yeah, I mean, I basically agree with them. I just I think that the way that this got quote unquote legalized was maximally bad for Michigan fans because there's no real clarity to what is and isn't allowed. Now, in practice, everything's allowed, but it's not like the NCAA came down from on high and said, these are the things that are good and these are the things that are bad. They just kind of like threw up their hands at a bunch of state legislation, all of which conflicts. So in an uncertain environment, Michigan apparently is deciding to play by the Queensberry rules, and they're about to go into an MMA cage, and they're about to see what happens when you put up your little fisticuffs like the Fighting Irish guy in 2022.
They're going to learn their lesson. They're just going to take a couple bad recruiting classes in the process and miss out. I mean, like, this is going to happen one year. Would you rather miss out on Dante Moore because of it? Would you rather miss out on Will Johnson because of it? Like, who's the guy? What year? How about Donovan Edwards? Like, what year are you going to lose the guy who otherwise would be the capstone on your class because you're the one school, and not the only school, but you're the main school that is really getting out in front and telling everybody we're not paying freshmen, which is resonating. I went to this was Michigan's own Michigan's own camp that they had a couple of weeks ago. And I was there in line with all these parents and coaches and the kids just waiting to get into Michigan Stadium. And they were all talking about Harbaugh's comments from up north where he was like, we're transitional, not transactional. And it's like they treat that as an FU. They believe that the program is saying you have not done enough work yet to be worth anything. And all of them are at a camp that they've driven to, that they're paid to go to, not their first camp, not the first time they've done anything football. It's not like these guys have not been making football their lives for years by the point they get to, especially the 5 stars. I just think they're wrong. They're fundamentally wrong about the whole concept that these guys should not be paid. By the time you get to the point where you're a 5-star recruit, you are valuable because you've made yourself valuable.
Look, if there was no value to it, you wouldn't see every program in the country, including Michigan, list the recruiting rankings of the prospects in their profile when they introduce them, right? I mean, there is some inherent value in that, and to me, I just don't see the distinction here between the impact of freshmen being paid from rookies being paid in professional leagues, and those locker rooms seem to do just fine. I do believe there's an adjustment period that you have to look to where, yeah, I think there are NIL issues in locker rooms right now. I'm sure Michigan has had some where you have guys looking at another guy and how much he's getting paid, and that having to be sorted through. This is all new, and it's gonna tax the coaches in ways that they haven't been taxed before. But you know what's going to happen? Over time, everyone's going to adjust. Over time, that freshman that got paid, had a deal coming in, he's going to be a senior. And he's going to see other freshmen coming in with deals, and it's not going to be a big deal anymore because they went through it themselves. So it'll cycle through, and it'll be fine eventually. I'm talking about for those other places where freshmen are getting paid. And my big issue with this, I want to move off this topic so we can talk about freshmen, about conference expansion. My issue with all of this is not freshmen getting. I don't think it should be a rule or a law that bars prospects from getting paid. I don't. I mean, look, you let the market determine that. You let the market settle it, if you will. But I disagree. I disagree with the notion that, foregoing being paid is somehow pure of heart, that it is more integrity laden for you to do so. That is, you're more of a team person if you forego getting paid right now. I disagree with all of those artificial constructs and harken back to what amateurism was at its inception, which was a mechanism of exclusion, and it became a mechanism of control. And this is just removing both of those with NIL, and I'm all for it. My issue is that not everyone is playing by the same rules. Just make the rules the same for everyone, and then let's go out and compete. And I say let all the guys get paid. As far as I'm concerned, let the market dictate.
Yeah, I mean, that strikes to the heart of the problem in some sense, in that right now, I think Michigan believes it's playing by the rules. And everyone else is driving 75 in a 70 zone. And
75.
Yeah, whatever you define it.
This is like Michigan showing up.
35.
It's like Michigan showing up in Mad Max Fury Road in a Studebaker and being like, "What's going on, guys?"
Yeah, that's well said, because that's what it is. In reality, but Michigan says no. We're going to play by what we perceive the rules are, and I don't see that changing until it is clear what the rules are. So I think Sam has struck to the core of the problem.
Yeah, hopefully they figure out a way through that. It's not so much. It's not so painful. I termed it short-term pain for long-term gain. I just hope it's not too painful in the interim. I mean, you raised some great points. I mean, Hassan Haskins, the developmental guy, Kwity Paye, a developmental guy. Question is, can you have enough of those developmental guys to compete annually? Like every year.
My point is that Michigan's already as good at that as they're going to get. Michigan is already one of the best, if not the best in the country at finding guys that they scout guys themselves and find people who are underrated. They are so good at it that it's really hard to get any better at it.
All right, let's talk about conference expansion, guys. USC, UCLA to the Big Ten. This was the move that we talked about last year, being the obvious retort, the obvious reply to the SEC luring Texas and Oklahoma. Took a year for it to take place, but that's about how long these discussions have been going on, Brian, according to the USC. Talk started last year, really picked up steam in the last couple of months, and then boom, here you go.
Yeah, and it's funny because the Bowl Alliance period, and then the BCS, and then it's always like the Big Ten and the Pac-12. The most important thing is the Rose Bowl. That's the most important thing. And then push comes to shove, and the Big Ten's like, let's destroy that. That's the first thing we're going to do now that we're a little afraid that the other conference that's already beating our ass is going to have a little bit more money, is destroy the Rose Bowl. Destroy the Pac-12, have it broken up into little bits that the Big 12 is going to be able to pick off. I mean, it just really strikes the hypocrisy of the whole situation, where it's just like, yeah, there's no honor among these thieves. So whatever traditions that you enjoyed in college football get a middle finger, and we get to see UCLA and USC do their thing in the Big Ten, which will be somewhat interesting. But I mean, I don't think we're done yet, even though, we've seen some financial numbers about Washington and Oregon that says that they'll be not even close to pulling their weight, which I found a little bit hard to believe. But it's a situation where the Big Ten's at 16 teams now, and like, are they going to stop there, or are they going to go to 20? I don't know. So I don't think the dust has settled yet, and probably won't settle for a couple years. And when we do see whatever the finished product is, I think you're going to have 2 super conferences and then a lot of detritus. And I don't think that's good for the sport.
Greg, when it's funny that Brian brings up no honor amongst thieves, and I have to sit here and say that I was an advocate for lack of honor among thieves. When Kevin Warren and Kliavkoff and the ACC commissioner got together for this alliance last year, I said at the time, these are not your friends, Kevin Warren. They're a means to an end. If your objective is blocking the voting power of the SEC and playoff expansion, then fine. But the minute you have the opportunity to pick off USC or UCLA or North Carolina, pick them off. That's what you have to do to better your position for your league. That is your primary responsibility, and it seems like that's what he went out there and executed.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole landscape has changed. I mean, right now it's, quote, legal to pay players. Ohio State comes in and says, hey, boosters, we need $13 or $15 million to keep our guys here, to keep them from going into the portal. And so at the same time, to say, well, the schools should play by some old traditional rules seems, I don't know, a little odd. Maybe that's right. But, as far as I can tell from the readings I've done on this, it doesn't seem like it's the Big Ten going out and trying in and of itself to put together a super conference. It seems like it's Fox Sports and ABC going out and saying, hey, if you guys do this, if you drag in USC and UCLA, we will pay you over $1 billion a year. And as a conference, and maybe even more than that. And so this to me feels like the sort of same thing that's going on the player side. It's the media coming to the schools and saying, hey, do this. Here's your conference, and here's how much money you're going to get paid if you do this. Whether I think this isn't the end. It was stunning at how little noise there was about this leading up to it. But I don't think it's the end. I mean, there's all kinds of rumors now. I know it seems that Washington and Oregon have been put on hold, pending what happens with Notre Dame and maybe Stanford and maybe North Carolina. I don't know. But I suspect a 20-team conference by the time the dust clears. And it feels plausible in basketball and football. How plausible it is in other sports, we'll have to wait and see. I can't see teams traveling every other weekend 6,600 miles from Maryland to LA. So I don't know.
Well, in Hockey East, they have this travel partner concept where you go to one team on a Friday and the next team on a Saturday. I think they're going to do that with the LA schools, where like if Michigan goes and plays at USC, they're going to play at UCLA and the next day or the day after. I mean,
Okay,
it's
yeah.
really the only way to make it workable for sports other than football.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that seems right.
I mean, UCLA could add hockey, and then that could bring
Well,
Arizona State back in.
UCLA.
Can you imagine being a baseball coach at one of those schools? You're like, are you serious?
I mean, they've been dragging along the Pac-12 forever too. So like, I mean, Oregon State just got good, but like Oregon State, their big wins will be over UCLA. So it's like, I mean, they've kind of been in there too. I mean, they're losing the Arizona schools is what they're losing.
Yeah, I mean,
but like,
is it plausible, Seth, that we'll see another hockey school come out of this?
yeah,
because of the
UCLA
money.
seems very interested in doing hockey. They've had like one of the best club hockey teams for a very long time, and have been exploring moving up multiple times before, and it always just didn't make sense to do it in their conference situation. So I think that this is it's a likely scenario that UCLA starts it. I don't think USC has any interest whatsoever. That's just my understanding talking to the UCLA hockey account on DMs for a little bit. Anyway, the big thing is that Fox and Disney are really running the show here, right? This is not Kevin Warren is just along for the ride, right? All the presidents are along for the ride. They see Fox come in and say, look, you're going to get $12 million a year if you stay on your current deal because we're losing cable, or you're going to make $25 million a year if we make a move here. What they want to do is capture enough market that every single week there's going to be a big game to fill the big game slot. There's going to be another big national game to fill the 3:30 slot. They're going to have a great night game every single week. Like that's what they're looking at. It's all TV considerations, which, that's not done yet. That whole market is not done transitioning. So I think this is going to be an ongoing process for 20 years. And I said this when Miami left the Big East. I'm like, this is the start of a very long process of everyone figuring out where they're going to be. It's just kind of funny that Indiana and Rutgers are along for the ride during all this.
Well, you look, if Kevin Warren is along for the ride, then Sankey was along for the ride when ESPN basically said, "Hey, Texas, Oklahoma, if you can't afford it, if it's too big a price tag, we'll help you pay it." Right? ESPN seemed to be a driving force behind that move, and maybe those are the two power brokers here. Whatever the case may be, the question now is, what's those networks or those conferences their next target? I think that for the Big Ten, it's obvious it's Notre Dame. They apparently put the brakes on Washington and Oregon for that reason. But a very close second, I have to guess would be North Carolina. And, I know a source, and we got this, I know Ira got this in this morning from a SEC source who said the SEC's next target, Clemson, North Carolina, and Duke. Been hearing a lot of Clemson smoke, but it does set up for North Carolina especially to be a battleground program between these leagues.
So I do have a slight disagreement with Seth about whether the conference commissioners have a role here, because, whatever his name, that guy, the Pac-12 commissioner who is inept.
Larry Scott.
Scott.
He's gone. It's Kliakoff is there.
Yeah, I know, but he's the reason that the Pac-12 didn't have a grant of rights. And the ACC has a grant of rights for, I think, the next 13 or 14 years.
2035.
Okay, so they're going to be not available, I think, until maybe a couple years before that. So the ACC is probably going to hang together for the next decade or so. Because
you think there's talk, but
the grant of rights is like, yeah, you could leave the conference, but we still have your rights. So what value does that school have for any conference for the next decade? And a couple of articles at The Athletic looked at trying to wriggle out from underneath those, and it's very difficult. So I do think that would be prohibitive. And honestly, if I'm Duke and if I'm North Carolina, I'm not interested, because I have the ACC, and Miami can go and Clemson can go, and that doesn't affect what the important thing is for my school, which is basketball. The ACC is already kind of a basketball league, but it has these football focused schools that are pretty bad at basketball. And if those teams go, I don't think that, Duke is going to be like, oh no, our 15 team league is now 12. And I have UNC in here. I have NC State. I have Wake Forest. I have all my local rivals. And I also have a conference that can get me a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And I don't think they care about football that much.
I think I agree if you're talking about tradition and basketball tradition and ties, but I wonder if $100 million trumps all that.
Maybe.
I couldn't. It's hard for me to envision that Duke would be happy being in the same conference with, say, Mississippi and Alabama and Mississippi State.
I hear you.
Somehow that just doesn't feel like it's.
But if the pay, I don't know what the ACC payout is now.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about schools getting $100 million per year, what becomes untenable is just being a member of another conference boosts your payout by, it doubles your payout. It's like, that's just too much money for them to turn down. Now, I don't know. I don't know what you talk about the wriggle room with the grant of rights. I don't know. I guess, there are some lawyers who say they might be able to get out of it. I don't know. There's some talk that
my understanding of that, and I'm pretty sure of this, is that you basically have to break up the ACC to make that work.
So was it 8 teams? 8 teams have to leave? Was that the number?
I don't remember the exact number, but that's basically what it is. They need to. The only way to do it, really, is to break up the ACC to the point where the ACC is like, okay, we're giving this up, because there's no. And that's plausible. I mean, it's certainly plausible that like Clemson and Miami jump to the SEC, and UNC and Duke go to the Big Ten, and that would do it, right?
Does Notre Dame count in that equation at all?
I don't think so, because they're not a full member.
I think Notre Dame
is signed through that if they have a rule that if they join a conference, it has to be the ACC until that contract runs out. So they have their own scenario where it's prohibitively expensive to leave, but they don't have full grant of rights left. What they do have is you have to leave. If you join a conference, you have to join the ACC. And again, if you break up the ACC, that goes away.
Yeah. How interested are these networks? Is the network interested enough to blunt whatever that price tag is? We'll offset that some. You're gonna have to pay some penalty, but we'll maybe chop it in half. Is Fox that interested in Notre Dame? Be interesting to see. Is ESPN that interested in Clemson? Be interesting to see. But that's the team that I'd heard smoke about. The first I've heard about North Carolina and Duke being part of the top target list for the SEC was from this SEC source that we have this morning. I would have thought it would have been Clemson, Florida, and Miami, Florida State, Miami. But it sounds like Carolina and Duke are battleground properties for the SEC.
Yeah. It's just like, I don't want Duke in the Big Ten, because like they don't bring anything in football, and then they make winning a title in basketball really hard. Like, I don't like. I kind of liked it when the Big Ten was 10 teams and you could like win titles a lot, and now it's going to be like, well, it's 2056, and last time we won a Big Ten title was 30 years ago because we got 65 teams in this conference. Come on.
Yeah. I mean, I put out a thing before where like the sensible way, the most sensical way that they can put this all together is if these two leagues grab so much that they become like an American and National League, and then break themselves into divisions that more or less recreate the old 10 division leagues. Yeah, like put the whole old Big Ten together, put
that doesn't
Penn
make
State out with the
ACC
anymore.
Teams. Like, because
they have that division breakdown.
Well, no, but if we're talking about like, okay, they can't add Washington and Oregon because those teams will only be worth $60 million a year, and the payout is going to be $100. Then like Stanford's not going to get picked up, Cal's not going to get picked up, Utah's not going to get picked up. None of these schools, like, we're bifurcating on like who can bring in money and who's like lucky, like Northwestern and Vandy. But like teams that are currently out in the cold, bringing them back in defeats the entire purpose of bringing in USC and UCLA in the first place.
Yeah, I think I wonder if part of it is we talk about riding on the coattails, because it sounds like UCLA had to ride the coattails of USC, and so maybe if you get a Stanford in, maybe that's in conjunction with a Notre Dame. If you get Duke in, maybe that's only if you can get a Carolina. That might be the way to get. That might be a means to an end if you want those bigger entities. If you want Notre Dame, if you want North Carolina, maybe if you want USC, maybe you got to take UCLA.
The Big Ten does not need to be a better basketball conference.
My point is, it's not going to happen all at once. I don't think you need to do this tomorrow.
So here's the question:
have a new normal.
You guys, you be the committee. So assuming that they aren't done, and I think that's a reasonable assumption to make. What's your next move? If you think at least 20 is the threshold, so let's just set it at 20. Who are your next 4 teams? If you don't want Duke or Carolina, Brian, who do you want as your next 4 teams?
So I think the thing that makes the most sense is if you can get them, and I'm just going to leave the financial stuff aside, is Notre Dame and then Stanford and Washington and Oregon. Because then I think you pretty much lock down the West Coast. You get Notre Dame. Notre Dame can be like, okay, we can still play Stanford. We can still play USC. We will deign to play the Big Ten teams occasionally. And the travel stuff gets a little bit less weird because you have 5 teams on the West Coast. And you have pretty much the best athletic department in the country in Stanford. You have a really good football program that brings a lot of Nike connections in Oregon. You have Washington, which is in Seattle. That's all I got for Washington. And those teams seem to fit culturally with the Big Ten. And they also don't terrify me as basketball programs by and large. So yeah, those would be the 4 that if I could pick to go to 20, those would be the 4 I pick.
Seth?
Yeah, those are easy to 4. I mean, you could talk about North Carolina and Duke, but for all the reasons Brian suggested, that they're not. You don't need a stronger basketball conference, and you kind of need to have some more weight on that West Coast right now. It's just very Midwestern, and Notre Dame's always just been like, every time we've had this conversation since the 90s, it's been like Notre Dame. I mean the 1890s, Notre Dame.
Yeah, I think those are the right ones. I guess I would go to Notre Dame and say we're taking Cal. Otherwise, we'll take San Francisco, Seattle. You take Cal. Now you've got teams on the West Coast, so you've minimized some of your travel problems. Notre Dame now is going to have a hard time scheduling some of its so-called traditional rivals. You have 2 10-team conferences. You play 9 games within the conference.
I mean, at some point, are we getting rid of the idea of non-conference games altogether?
That's what it's that. I mean, if you have a 20-team conference, you don't have much unless you just play inside your quote division. And you could pretty much get rid of non-conference games. My suggestion, if they go that way, is you do a win in your division counts 2, and a win outside of the division counts 1. And you add up the total points. That way you minimize the variance of schedules to some degree. And it makes it a more level playing field. But yeah, if you've got a 20-team conference, it's either really 2 separate leagues, or it's or you're getting out of the games,
or you're getting weird, like the stuff that Seth and I constantly propose, where it's like, let's have dynamic schedules. This will never work, but it sounds cool.
Yeah.
Relegation,
right?
Yeah, we can pass.
They might look at that now. I mean, if you can't get rid of Northwestern and Rutgers and Indiana, like they might be interested in relegation ideas now, just to be like, okay, because the whole idea is getting these bigger games, right? So if you have a UCLA Indiana, holding down your schedule, and you can make that a UCLA Michigan game instead, like that's, you kind of want to do that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So another message from this SEC source, and we got to get to a break. I am shocked that there's talk in SEC land that there's little interest in Florida State or Miami. I'm just surprised, but I'm not doubting the source. I'm just not that. Does that compute for you guys that they would be not that interested in Florida State or Miami?
I mean, neither of those programs has been very good for a long time, but it's Florida. Maybe they feel like they already have UF and that's enough. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how much media attention Miami actually gets in Miami.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a pro sports town that turns out for the Canes when they're like #1 for 70 straight weeks.
Mm-hmm.
But like, they can't fill their stadium. They can't come anywhere close to filling their stadium. Florida State has just been kind of in the doldrums for a long time.
Right. Need facility upgrades. I'd be interested in what their financials look like. Like, to your point, what do they really bring to the table financially?
Yeah.
And that may be why.
But I mean, if you're talking about media markets, Miami's a pretty big one, so that does surprise me. And South Carolina is not. So also you already have South Carolina, so it seems like Clemson is based solely on their recent success under Dabo Swinney, which might be ephemeral, especially if the playing field is level when it comes to, under the table incentives that are now over the table. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it does surprise me because if UCLA and USC are attractive, despite not being that good in football over the past 10 years, USC's been up and down, I guess, then it would seem like the same logic would apply to Miami, where it's like media market above all, even if it's a pro sports town like LA is for the most part.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to a break. We'll pick this up on the other side here on the Michigan Insider MGoBlog Roundtable on Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, The Ticket.
Clear on the radio.
Rose Bowl was already destroyed by the BCS. When's the last time Big Ten champ, Pac-12 champ played in the Rose Bowl?
Wasn't it like 2 years ago?
It was Penn State and USC in 2016. I know that.
I mean, that guy does have a point, but it is kind of like that's why they didn't want to go to they didn't want to expand the playoff. That was one of their reasons for not expanding the playoff. Like they didn't.
You guys think there's any chance that this team's getting dropped?
That's very hard to do legally, as I understand it.
Yeah,
that is a very difficult expectation.
Pretty doubtful.
I don't see that.
Who would you drop? Because
Rutgers.
Northwestern is Chicago's Big Ten team,
Yeah.
right? And Indiana has a very storied basketball program, and I don't think.
To be fair, Michigan is the Big Ten. Michigan is Chicago's Big Ten team.
Yeah,
it's not Notre Dame.
That's the joke.
I know.
But who else are you dropping? Minnesota? That would be
Rutgers.
terrible. Well, yeah.
Back in
Rutgers seems to be the common theme here.
But Rutgers was added because of the media market, so you still got the media market, I guess.
I don't see any team getting dropped. I just don't see that happening unless somebody wants to be dropped, and I can't see the teams that are.
Nobody wants to be dropped.
Unless they play Chicago, nobody wants to be dropped.
Right.
Unless Michigan decides to go full Chicago.
Not with the money being about being close to what they're saying it's going to be. When we first started talking $100 million a couple of weeks ago, I was like, there's just no way. Now, maybe they were sort of letting us know something was on the horizon without saying it explicitly when they started throwing out those $100 million number, because I just don't see how they would have gotten that without USC and UCLA, without the LA market. Now it makes sense.
How are you grasping for another $100 million and you can't pay the freshmen?
Well, that's not the Big Ten's problem anymore.
Right. That's a Michigan issue.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
Totally unrelated, as we're back in about 20 seconds anyway, but I just got a press release that there is a bipartisan legislation plan in the Michigan State House that would legalize alcohol sales at college stadiums in the state of Michigan.
Oh, God.
Level the playing field because it's already legal at Michigan State, I think is what the lining was.
Is it?
Yeah, it is.
I didn't know that. I hadn't been there.
You guys been getting any feedback on the lack of RVs now in the Pioneer lot?
Coming back on
Really,
radio, guys.
Yeah.
came up at
Yes.
city council. I don't know what happened there. Like, what possible motivation would Ann Arbor Public Schools have to do that? It's like, let's just cut off a lot of money that we get.
We're back on radio in 5, 4, 3.
And we are back, folks, here on the Michigan Insider Sports Talk 1050 WTKA, online at WTK.com. Before we get back to the MGoBlog Roundtable, listen, I've been telling you guys for a month the great deals over at Brighton Ford through July 7th. Very, very clear that these deals will go away on the 7th, so take advantage now. You well-qualified lessees can get in on a 2022 Ford Explorer for as low as $296 a month, or a 2022 Ford F-150 for as low as $231 a month, both with only $2,000 down, plus first payment, taxes, doc fee, title, license, and state fees due at signing. You'll get your security deposit waived. You'll get 7,500 miles per year on a 24-month lease. All you have to do for more details is call 1-800-NEW-FORD. Make it out to the lot at 8240 West Grand River Avenue in Brighton, Michigan. Then you can get on board with Brighton Ford. Getting back to the roundtable, guys, it's time to get on board with a new Michigan baseball coach, right?
Yeah. Seth knows more about this than I do. So
This is Indiana's old coach. He took a while, but he built Indiana into a pretty good program considering they're Indiana. And because of that, everyone wanted him. He went to Arizona State and absolutely failed there. Talk is that nobody else really wanted him after that. A guy with that level should have been picked up and had some job in baseball last year and didn't. So I think Michigan kind of missed out on some of the guys that they wanted. And we're looking around and be like, okay, we need to get someone who can A, recruit. And that's, one of the things he's always been able to do. And B, knows the Big Ten well enough. And, this guy won in Indiana. So I don't know. I was not
Tracy Smith.
I didn't know anything about Bakich either when they got him. So I think that it could work out, but obviously they didn't get any of the guys that they had on the top of their list.
Yeah, Alex Drain wrote a very thoughtful article at MGoBlog about this, and he was very, I think, down on this choice also. I'm not so much. Michigan did try and hire Penders at UConn, who would probably have been a good choice, but couldn't work it out with him. They tried to hire
CMU guy?
Yeah, no, they tried to hire Chris Fetter.
Oh, Fetter, yeah, that was.
Yeah, and he
said it pretty early on that he wasn't going to leave. The
he wasn't interested in the job. He would have been a great choice, of course, and he's doing well with the Tigers, who clobbered the Indians this week 4 times, or the Guardians. And sorry, and so Bischel at Central Michigan seemed like the obvious choice and has done very well at Central Michigan, incredibly well at Central Michigan, and knows the Midwest and has recruited well at CMU. And Michigan interviewed him, but something must have happened there. Incidentally, Bischel was also interviewed, I believe, by Northwestern and Ohio State and somebody else, and none of them hired him, which I found very, very odd. Given what his history has been, and he's a younger guy. Tracy Smith is in his 50s, mid 50s, I think, mid to late 50s, perhaps. And so it seems, at least superficially, not all that great. Although the alternatives didn't look all that great either. I think they were talking Michael Bradar, who's 27 years old and has never been a manager. So I think he's been a hitting coach in the Padres organization, and Bobby Scales, who is a very good player here and has some professional experience, but he has always been kind of an administrator more than an on field guy. So, and I don't know if either one of those, either Bradar or Scales were actually interested. So this feels to some extent like a default. On the other hand, he really did build a program that hadn't been very good and turned it into a very, very good program in Indiana. That track record is undeniable. And he got guys at Indiana who became good major league players. He recruited really well as Arizona State.
Yeah,
but-
has there been any background on why things didn't work at Arizona State? I mean, we know he had
there has
at least
there
one
has
Rizzo
been.
player in Spencer Torkelson, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
there
yeah,
has been. I
Torkelson.
mean, if you go to Arizona State, you have to play the recruiting game, right? And you have to, and they certainly pay their players back there, and they're baseball parents too. Now, I know every sport says, oh no, football parents are the worst, or hockey moms are the worst. Like baseball, to my understanding, takes the cake. Like the baseball parents are, of all the parents, the craziest parents. And Arizona State had more baseball parents than, and this has always been true. Arizona State is like, they live in that world. That world goes and like centers themselves in the Phoenix area, Scottsdale area, and like that's where the parents take their kids to live to, because they're all mirror image projects, right? They're just, baseball becomes their entire lives since the time they're 12. So Arizona State is like the epicenter of that, and Tracy Smith was probably not the right guy for that program. Like I'm not as down on him as I think Alex is over that Arizona State period, because I think, if you're thinking in terms of Michigan is trying to build like a humongous program and compete nationally with everybody, and they're going to spend the kind of money that it takes to do that, and they're going to pay the players to do that and work with parents and everything, then yeah, he's not a really good pick. If you're coming at it from the perspective that Michigan's probably coming at it, which is we want a John Beilein who can run a program with the limitations that Michigan's going to put on you, then maybe he really is. Maybe he's a guy who really succeeded in the Midwest, and the added pressure of Arizona State and dealing with, that whole circus was just that's not his jam. He's kind of a hands-off guy who trusts his players. And the kind of player you get at Michigan is very dissimilar. I would say probably on the opposite extreme from the type of player you normally get at Arizona State.
So
yeah,
Eric, real quick, Eric, before he left, he was talking about how epic this incoming class was. Like, I got a bunch of dudes. This is an outstanding recruiting class. Talking about recruits in ways you don't typically hear coaches talk about recruiting. It's sort of like when Mel came on and said, I got the Fab Five. Like, this is like the Fab Five coming in. Like, you don't hear coaches hype their classes like that, but Eric was doing that. Here's the question. How much of that class is left now? Because I know some of those guys are peeling off after his departure.
They're all, I think the reason a lot of them jumped in the portal was they were worried about where Michigan was going to, so they wanted to give themselves an option. And that deadline was coming. That deadline was July 3rd or July 4th or something. So they had to be in the portal if they wanted to have the option to leave. So I don't think that they're going to lose everybody, but I think that of all the hires they made, this is probably on the maybe lower end of guys able to hold on to that. Tracy Smith's a good recruiter. He knows what he's doing, but he also has to develop relationships with all of them. And I think that there was a higher chance of holding on to that class if there was some sort of continuity, which there probably is. I think Brandon Ninja's going to stick around, and some of the front staffers have been there since I was hanging around that program. So they're going to have some continuity there, but I think that class was contingent on Bakich making Michigan a national contender, and you're not going to have that anymore. I think that Tracy's going to have to start a little bit behind.
Yeah, I think he will start behind, but there has been some defection. It isn't clear how permanent all these defections are. I mean, the big ones are Obertop and Bertram. Now, I think Bertram is going to Clemson for sure. I'm not sure about Obertop.
Obertop was going to, wasn't he like a pro prospect though?
He might be getting the draft anyway. Weiss, I don't know. He might have gone to Clemson too.
Yeah.
Other than that of existing players, aside from those that go into the draft, there hasn't been a lot of defection or much defection. In terms of their class, they lose a guy named I think it's Brandon Naraki, who's a 9.5 star out of 10, and is a pro prospect. He's a shortstop. He's going. He's going with Bakich, I think. And there's another guy, Joe Allen, who's unrated. He throws 95. He's a big pitcher.
Wasn't there a kid? Who's the kid from Orchard Lake? There was a kid from Orchard Lake that was.
Yeah, that one is the bigger risk. There is he's a big first baseman who has a lot of power, a great hitter, but he's more likely to go in the pro draft. And so the question there, that the bigger risk there has always been with him. Will he be? Is it Schobart? No, something like that. The bigger risk. Yeah, the bigger risk with him is that he'll go in the draft. But Eric was correct. He did recruit a really good class this year, and he's got it lined up for next year too. How many of those kids will come to Michigan? I don't know. But the bigger risk of defection on those kids, I think, is Major League Baseball as opposed to that draft, as opposed to running off to Clemson, although we may see some of that also. In the short term, the issue for Tracy Smith is going to be how many of these kids he can piece back together. And let's face it, Michigan this year had a kick-ass offensive team that could not throw the ball, and so it wasn't like it wasn't like Michigan was killing it from the mound, because they weren't. They were awful, and so Smith has some things to piece together, and I see it as an okay choice.
If someone had a way to develop college pitchers, they would just destroy it in NCAA baseball right now.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting developed anymore. They go through all their training beforehand, and the big schools will pick up their staff, and then there's a whole bunch of guys who didn't make it who become relievers, and they're all in the South. But having someone who could recruit someone with some arm talent and then start him 2 or 3 years later, that would change baseball.
Yeah. All right. Very, very last one. This is a way too early because we haven't talked about Yusef Kayet at all on here, have we? I don't think
we haven't.
Yeah,
we haven't because we didn't meet last week.
Yeah, and so with Yusef Kayet in the fold, the roster now set. I mean, kind of getting. It seems like all the rosters are set now across the league. How do you see Michigan sort of looking? And we can get deeper into this next week. How do you see Michigan looking in sort of the Big Ten race next year?
Well, it depends on how much Kayet brings immediately, because I think Michigan does need an extra contributor, and Joey Baker is a guy who's 10 minutes off the bench, probably maybe 15. And if he's able to have a impact like Franz Wagner as a freshman, then I think that raises Michigan's ceiling significantly. That's an open question. He's been in France for a couple years. He's playing for a youth team there of a big program. He looks good. Long guy, and I'm really happy to see that he shot 35% from three. As motion looks good, and you see these highlight tapes, and it's a lot of him running the floor for dunks, which is great when it happens, but floor spacing is going to be really important, especially with Hunter Dickinson around. And if he's just a 6'8" shooter who's got some defensive upside, I think that's really big for this team, because T. Will is a guy who has some size but isn't particularly long, and then you have some questions at the three, like a guy who can step up and defend wings was a huge problem last year. I don't know if that's Kayet, but I'm not saying it's not either. So he's a huge wild card, just like Franz was.
Yeah, I see. He goes by the name, incidentally, of Yo-Yo.
Yeah,
is what I heard or read. Yo-Yo Hyatt, and I've seen his tape. I like him, But Michigan is Juwan has his hardest problem in his tenure this year, because it's a complete blank slate in some sense. He's got 7 players with first-year eligibility. He's got Jason Kobe, who didn't really play all that much, and then he's got 2 kids transferring. He's essentially got 2 kids out of 13 who've really played. I mean, he's got Hunter, of course, which is great, and then he's got T. Will. And so how this team pieces together is really, really hard to say at this moment. And my guess is for the coaching staff, it's going to be a difficult process, or at least a time-consuming process before they actually piece this all together. I think there'll be more ball screens if Doug McDaniel plays because I won 5 screens.
Gotta play. They don't have any guards.
Yeah, well,
Llewellyn and Buffkin are the only other guards on the team.
unless Jet can play the 2, and I don't know if he can or can't.
Those kinds of guys, they can play the 2 sometimes, but like you need to have. It's about who you can guard, right? So if you're playing a team that's going to be playing 2, 6'3", 6'4" guys, then you need to have more. You need somebody out there who can guard another guard, and like they don't really have that. I don't know if Jets can be able to take on somebody that quick.
Yeah, there's so many questions right now. It's hard to even begin to answer them. The one thing you can say is that the Big Ten was pretty much decimated, the top talent in the Big Ten. And so Michigan doesn't look a lot different than anybody else in the Big Ten in this sense. I mean, Michigan State has no big guys. They have a good backcourt. Everybody is looking at a certain level of difficulty in restructuring their rosters. I mean, Illinois lost everybody, but they've got new guys in who are talented. How they piece together, I don't know. How much do you trust Brad Underwood to put together a coherent whole? Not me. Purdue has problems. I mean, they have great coaching, but they lost a lot. So, and it's the same throughout the conference. Ohio State has good kids coming in, but they lost their 2 best players. So it's right now what the conference looks like, what Michigan looks like is no one really knows.
Gotcha. All right, that'll do it for us today. Another great roundtable session. We'll get deeper into Michigan basketball next week. Until then, thanks for listening. We'll see you folks tomorrow here on the Michigan Insider on Sports Talk 1050 WTK, The Ticket, the official